Hello, and welcome to this, our 70th live stream for those in the know. This is, of course, a play on words with Gnosis because our Monday video was on the Gnostics. So, today's live stream is for those in the know, but not necessarily Gnostics. Okay, so with that little pun out of the way, for those of you who don't know, our channel just gained its 7,000th subscriber just recently, so we turned 7,000th, and we're thrilled about this, and we're grateful to all our subscribers who have supported this channel by watching our videos and by joining us here on our weekly live streams. So, with that said, the rules of these live streams are the same as always, which is super chats have priority. But if you're not going to ask a super chat, we still take non-super chat questions. So in those cases, we ask that you begin your question with a Q and a colon. So as I'm scanning through the live stream chat, I know it's directed to me and not to somebody else. So I look for that Q and the colon. The second thing I would ask is that you only post your question once, because I sort of key off of previously asked questions. And if I didn't get to your question this time, well, you can always post it next time and we'll see. The third thing is, if you ask a question about a verse in the Bible or a word from a foreign language, give me a little context. For a Bible verse, please include the book it's from, the chapter, and the verse. And if it's from a foreign language, do include what language you think it's from and what does the word mean. So with that said, let's start getting into the questions. And we are going to start tonight with some non-super chats, like we always do. Okay. Our first non-super chat is going to be from Mekatanki Stalinist, who asks, what was the family structure in ancient Egypt like? Was it similar to the traditional nuclear family? Similar, yes, but it's not quite the same. Okay? So in ancient Egypt, you did have, say, when a young couple got married, it was typical that there would be an engagement. It would be up to the man to build the house. And then once the house was built, he would go collect his wife. And they would move into that house. At that point, they would have their children. Now, a house would not just include, say, mom, dad, and children, but also the family servants, the slaves. It was very, very uncommon for a house of any major means not to have servants of some kind. Perhaps the only exception to these was the farming class, who were so poor that they couldn't have servants. But if you had if you were, say, a scribe or an administrator, or even in some cases an artisan. So even many of the craftsmen at Deir al-Medina had slaves. And they were considered to be part, not only property, but part of the family. And at the death of the parents, they would be divided amongst the children, same way as any property would. So we did see that nuclear family was a little broader than what we'd have in North America. Now, when your parents died, it was pretty common for, say, the surviving parent to move in with the nuclear family. So there was this idea that the children were in some ways responsible for taking care of their parents as well. So in many cases, it was nuclear plus, but it wasn't these huge family groups like you find in Mesopotamia. In Mesopotamia, you would actually have several generations living under massive houses. Okay? They would build these massive houses in Mesopotamia, and several generations would live within those, say, basically a section of that massive house. Egypt wasn't like that. People tended to have smaller homes, and thus they tend to be usually single-family dwellings, but usually single-family plus. So single-family plus slaves or plus elderly parents. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you for the question. It's a good question. Okay. Our next non-super chat is from Dark Blade, who asks, what are declensions and did the Egyptian language have them? Okay. A declension is when a language, basically nouns, adverbs, pronouns, etc., has changes in form to express gender, number, or case. Now, the English language doesn't have case, but it does have say, gender and number. So the Egyptian language did have declensions, especially in its nouns, its adjectives, even its adverbs had declensions. And typically it would be run along the line of masculine, singular, and then by number, masculine, feminine, and then by, say, number, which would be generally singular, dual, and multiple. So, you had essentially six declensions to deal with in the Egyptian noun system. So it does have declensions, and they're not terribly complicated. I mean, it's not like Greek. Not even close to Greek as far as its declensions go. But it did have them. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the question. And interesting question. It's one I don't get a lot of. I don't get a lot of grammar questions. So, but yes, it is true. The Egyptian language did have declensions. Okay, question 3. Octonotsful asks, what did, quote, land flowing with milk and honey mean to the early Israelites? Was it an Egyptian idiom? I don't know if it was an Egyptian idiom, but it is a phrase that does appear in some Egyptian texts. They will talk about a land flowing with milk, and then a couple lines later, a land flowing with honey. So, and it is used to describe, interestingly enough, Canaan during the Middle Kingdom. So we do see this. We do see this in Egyptian texts. Now, what does that text mean? That's a whole different question. In the case of milk, you read the biblical text, and it's essentially a specific kind of milk. It's goat's milk. And honey is wild honey. So a land flowing with milk and honey means a land that's flowing with the goods of, say, pastoral life. The life of a shepherd. You go out, you tend your goat flocks, and you reap the milk from your goats. In the case of the honey, it's whatever honey you come across in the wild. These are not the goods of, say, agriculture. These are not your agricultural products. These are your products of tending your flocks across many fields. So that's what it was meant. It's meant to convey a pastoral lifestyle, not a agricultural lifestyle. So that's what's being promised here, is a life of dependence, not a life of security. So that's a very, very different take than what we commonly get when we hear, say, sermons on this, which tends to be, oh, it's a land of abundance. Well, it is, but it's a land of abundance as long as you depend on the Lord to give you that dependence. So anyway, I hope that explained the question. Thank you very much for the question. Interesting question again. And it's an often misunderstood idiom. And it does appear in Egyptian texts, just not in that exact formulation. You do see it, a land flowing with milk, blank, 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 a land flowing with honey. So it is in Egyptian texts also. So it does seem to be perceived to be it was in the culture, especially during the Middle Kingdom. All right, so that's our third super chat. We got one more, and then we'll move on. Or sorry, third non-super chat. We're going to take one more non-super chat, and then we're going to go on to the super chats. And the third super chat, or I keep mixing them up today. The fourth non-super chat, I need to slow down, is from Nathan Yadone, and he asks, Dr. Falk, which podcasts on the paranormal do you listen to and would recommend, if any? By the way, lest you forget Hot Sword 2023. We can always hope for Hot Sword 2023. They're still looking for that scriptorium. I don't know if they'll find it, honestly. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But everyone's got their fingers crossed. Everyone wants to find that scriptorium. I think that's the only reason they've continued to dig there over the last 10 years, is in hopes of finding that scriptorium. Okay. So, what... I'm going to read it off my cell phone, actually. Which ones do I listen to? Which ones would I recommend? Okay, one's in the paranormal. There's two I would essentially three I'd recommend. And for different reasons. Weird Darkness is one. This one's actually a variety of different paranormal and basically mystery tales. Recounting like true crime, that sort of thing, but also, as I said, the paranormal. And it's done by a Christian, Darren Marlar. And it was very interesting about this podcast is, when he finishes his podcast on, say, whatever he's doing, whether it's true crime or paranormal, whatever Weird Darkness it is, he usually ends it off with a Bible verse. So, and he even has his own church, which is a very interesting thing all by itself. So I think that's a one I would recommend, is Weird Darkness. Another one I would recommend is Unexplained Encounters. Unexplained Encounters is really supposed to be eyewitnesses writing their stories of their own paranormal encounters. Now, I wouldn't recommend everything on there, but I also think, too, that it's always interesting to hear people's stories about what their paranormal encounters are, whether or not they're Christian. Because everyone experiences the paranormal in a different way. So I think that's very interesting all on its own. And then the final one I would recommend is Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Now, Jimmy Akin is an apologist for Catholic answers. So he's a Roman Catholic. But he also does a lot of topics in the paranormal. Like he'll do stuff on psychic phenomena, UFO sightings, various paranormal manifestations. So he doesn't sort of limit himself to Catholic apologetics. He goes, say, Catholic apologetics plus this huge, diverse world out there of strange encounters. So those are the three I would recommend. Weird Darkness, second one again. Yeah, Weird Darkness, Unexplained Encounters, and Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Okay? So there you have it. Those are the ones I would recommend. Okay, so that's it for the non-super chats for the beginning. And now let's get into the super chats. And our first super chat is from Cy Legio for $50. For 50 Swedish kroner. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, great video on Gnosticism and a series to yay. Yes. Yes, we got at least 2 more episodes coming. So we're by no means finished with Gnosticism yet. I think I could keep going on about Gnosticism if I really wanted to, but I don't think anyone would really want that. So we'll limit it off to 3. And he asks, could the Venerable Doctor also recommend a book on the history of mystery schools? Asking for a friend. Ooh, sure you're asking for a friend. Sure you are. Well, unfortunately, I don't have a good book on the history of mystery schools because there hasn't been one done. There's been some academic books that have been done on, say, Gnosticism, on Hermetism, or Hermeticism, depending on which period you're talking about in time. The problem is mystery schools is such sort of a broad field that you're covering a lot of different territory there. I mean, you're covering the Gnostic sects. You're talking about Hermetic sects. You're talking about, say, Greek healing cults. There's a whole lot of different, and then when you start getting into, say, medieval and especially Enlightenment. Yeah, now you're talking about stuff like Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry. There's some really weird stuff going on, and like Enlightenment period, like witchcraft and secret societies. It gets strange. I mean, this topic gets hairy and strange fast. So the problem is, how do you condense all that into, say, a history? It's a very difficult task to do, and nobody has done it well. So I can't really answer that question because I haven't found one myself. Even when I was writing my master's thesis, which was on Gnosticism, I couldn't find much of anything on this per se. And then you're strapped with the problem that most of these mystery schools transmitted their knowledge orally. That's a huge problem. How are you? I mean, one of the problems is that these mystery schools were highly dependent upon the transmission of secret knowledge. Well, one way you keep a secret is you don't write it down. Okay? The worst way to keep a secret is to write it down. Because people make copies of stuff that's written down. And then the secret knowledge gets out. That's sort of the opposite of trying to keep a secret. So most of these groups had their secret knowledge passed down orally. So you'd have to actually raise up in these organizations a pretty high level before they told you the deep mysteries, the deep secrets. So that's just going to be a problem with finding out what they believe. I mean, this is one of the reasons why Gnostic scholars are all over the map. That none of the Gnostic scholars of today agree on anything, practically. Is because they're sort of guessing from the text that we have without realizing that the texts sort of tell us what the Gnostics read, but not what they believe. So it's very, very difficult to try to surmise what any particular group believed. This is why we have even though we know the identities of, say, a dozen mystery schools, we have virtually no material on what they believed. That's going to make it really difficult to write a proper history. So, unfortunately, I have to kind of leave you with, I wish there was one. I wish there was a good book I could recommend. But I haven't seen one. Okay? So, anyway, I thank you for the super chat. I'm sorry I couldn't give you a better answer, but there's a really good reason why there isn't a better answer to this. It's because it's really difficult to do. So anyway, I hope that helped at least give you a little more information. There are some good academic books on, say, Hermeticism, on, say, Gnosticism, if they're out, if you want to explore those. But there's nothing that's going to cover a general history of the mystery schools. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it, and I hope that at least gives you a little guidance and helps. Okay, our next super chat is from Alexander McCrae for £8.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. The Pelasgian creation myth mentions the goddess Eurynome bruising the head of the serpent Ophion, similar to Genesis 3:15 prophecy. is this a problem for the Genesis narrative? Actually, it isn't. And here's the reason. The reason is because this is actually not found in Pelasgian creation myths. This is a reconstructed myth. This was a myth that was reconstructed by Robert Graves in 1955. Okay? There was a movement in the 1950s where people would reconstruct the myths of the past using, say, modern literary principles. Now, Graves was not the only one who did this. There's a guy by the name of Gardner who also did this with Celtic myths. But it was a very popular trend in the 40s and 50s. So, what Graves did was took principles of Gnostic reinterpretation and Christian myth and sort of re-sewed together Greek myth to come up with these new retellings of myth. And one of these retellings, reimaginations, was the myth that the goddess Eurynome bruised the head of the serpent Ophion. Okay. Now, in real Pelagasian myth, Eurynome and Ophion were basically spiritual powers that ruled together before the Titans. And then they were cast down, and the Titans ruled in their place. Okay? But this whole sort of this back and forth where Eurynome created Ophion, and then Ophion, wrapped himself around the egg to create basically a dove's egg, impregnated Eurynome, who brought forth a dove, and then she kicks out his teeth. That's Robert Graves' fantasy, essentially. So, there's a whole lot of baggage that Graves is importing into the myth that wasn't there in the original Greek texts. So this is obviously not going to present a problem for, say, Genesis 3:15, because even though the Pelagasian culture, say, predates, say, a lot of, say, Israelite culture, that particular recast of the myth doesn't. It's a modern invention, essentially. So, anyway, I hope that helps. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, next super chat is from the Camel Leopard for $20. Good to see you tonight. Thank you very much for the super chat. Shabbat Shalom. Well, Shabbat Shalom to you also. Exactly 1 year from writing this, 9/20, September 20th, I sent you an email asking about the 10th plague. I was so impressed by your accessibility and hospitality that it led me to your streams. Thank you for such a great year of learning and helping me and so many others better understand God's Word. Abba bless you, Dr. Falk. Keep up the great work. Well, thank you so very much. And you've been a tremendous support to this channel, and we really do appreciate your questions and your super chats. Yeah, we look back every time we sort of hit one of these big mile markers like we just did with the 7,000 subscribers. We look back and we look at our, I'll admit it, humble beginnings. Our channel here now is a little over 2 years old. I mean, it's not an old channel, not by a long shot. And we look at it and we go, well, God is good. God is so good. When we started off, we had a Nikon camera, that died. The Nikon camera died. I should get it replaced someday. That's going to be costly. Yeah, they're really not. They were really not meant for doing filming like we were doing. Uh, we had a broken Hummel lamp with no shade. That was our studio lights. Yeah, that was fun, wasn't that? We had a green screen that was made of 4 pieces of taped what's it paper, construction paper, 4 pieces of taped construction paper. That was our green screen. That green screen cost us like $5, like $1.25 a sheet. It was so janky, that setup. And we were thinking, okay, we're gonna do this channel on Egypt in the Bible. No one's gonna watch this, it's gonna be so niche, no one's gonna care. And when we started off, it was really slow. I mean, I think I had 10 subscribers for the first 3 months. I mean, it was like nobody watched. And slowly it grew, and then we sort of got involved with Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy, and then started taking off. But yeah, it was a slow process. So yeah, it was. But we do look back and we do think, hey, God's been good here. So, but we do reflect on this and we go, wow, we're actually so grateful to have the support that we do have now, because it allows us to do this a lot more. Yeah. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for that super chat, and thank you for your support over the past year. It's been fantastic to have you here. We really, really appreciate your contributions as well, because we can't do it without you guys. We can't do it without the contributions, and we can't do it without the questions. You supply the questions, and we love giving the answers, but we don't give you the questions. You give us the questions, and questions are more important. A good question is more important than a good answer. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and thank you for your support. Okay, we got the next one from Brick Creation here for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. I see many eschatological views, fulfillments from many different perspectives to nation, and they seem to be interesting but differ a lot. Is this how prophetic literature works? Surprisingly, yes. We have to understand that prophetic literature is not fatalism. It's not fatalism. It is always contextualized. And it seems to be contextualized for every generation. Let me give you an example here, and I'm going to give you a non-biblical example, which is that the prophecy of Nefertiti. Now, the prophecy of Nefertiti was a prophecy written during Dynasty 12 to support a political agenda. That's really what it was. It was basically a prophecy to legitimize a new government, a new administration, a new king on the throne. So it was a prophecy that was intended to, to show the brilliance and the wonders of the Middle Kingdom bureaucracy. Okay? Now, fast forward to the beginning of Dynasty 18, it's recontextualized again. The old king, Amenemhat I, was long forgotten about, but Semites had started invading the land. And at the end of the Second Intermediate Period, with the fall of Hyksos rule, people were reading that text again and going, this king, Ahmose I, looks very much like Ameni, Amenemhat I. So they recontextualized that prophecy to say, this new king, Ahmose I, This is the triumphant king of the prophecy of Nefertiti. Okay. So they retextualized it at the beginning of Dynasty 18 as a triumphalist piece of literature. Fast forward again to mid-Dynasty 19 when the text once again regains popularity. Well, this time, it's not a triumphalist piece of literature. It's a, how is this going to help us understand what's going on? Because what's happening during Middle Dynasty 19 is that you have the plagues and the Exodus. So the Egyptians are recontextualizing, have 3 separate readings for the same piece of literature, and each of those readings is seen as legitimate. You have its political reading at the beginning. You have its triumphalist reading in Dynasty 18. And then you have its explanatory reading in mid-Dynasty 19. So you have one piece of literature there with 3 separate recontextualizations. So this is not uncommon, and it does seem to be part of this. You know, for example, before World War I, people were reading the book of Revelation not as, say, disaster coming to the world, but essentially, again, as triumphalist literature. They thought that the world was going to get better and better and better until the coming of Messiah. And that the punishments that were really there was against spiritual forces, not against real people. So they were recontextualizing it for their time. And this was during, say, the height of, say, post-millennialism. Well, you get World War I. People aren't looking so good anymore. You get World War II, where people are saying, well, maybe we aren't advancing as well as we think here. And that spells sort of the end of post-millennialism for the most part. And now people post-World War II are recontextualizing the book of Revelation now in a new way. And this is what we do with prophecy. We tend to recontextualize it with every reading. Every generation is going to recontextualize prophecy in new ways. And that actually seems to be the way prophecy is meant to be read. We don't know when the fulfillment is going to be actually triggered. So how do we know when we get a reading right? We don't, but we are going to recontextualize it for our own times. And this is true, has been true throughout the entire time of, say, the scriptures. Throughout the whole biblical period, into the church period, to the modern times. This has been true. So, just because denominations and traditions and perspectives are reading these things in different ways doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong. They might not be right, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong either. Because that's the way this literature is meant to be read. Is through recontextualized eyes. And if you understand that, you could then understand that these works are then not fatalist, but are going to be read. That what changes here, the condition that changes here is the context in which it's being read in the current moment, but not necessarily how it was originally written. It's one of those exceptions to, say, reading the Bible in its original context. That's always helpful, even with prophecy, by the way. It's always helpful to read prophecy in its original context, but you have to understand that prophecy is meant to be read in more than its original context, but in new contexts as well. So knowing that, these prophecies are not necessarily fatalist. They're going to depend upon what context it's being read in. So anyway, I hope that helps. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. It's a complicated subject. It really is. And I think we're just now starting to understand more about how prophecy in the past was read and how it applied, how that legitimate reading of the past applies to us today. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. All right, Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Any reason why the New Testament would be written down in Greek and not Hebrew or Aramaic? Yes, there is. Was it to communicate to Grecian places? That too. Hebrew then Greek? Not likely. All right, let's get into it. Here's the thing. It was a Greek world. that's the reason, essentially. The Greek was pretty much spoken everywhere. There's nowhere you could go in the Roman Empire and not find someone who could speak Greek, essentially. It was everywhere. It was after the conquest of Alexander the Great. It basically, the Hellenistic world was from essentially India all the way to Egypt and Thrace and Greece. Okay? So Greek was everywhere. Even in the early days of the Roman Empire, where one of the first conquests that Rome made was the Greek archipelago. And at first, the Romans treated the Greeks like servants, lower class. They weren't speaking Latin, so they were these lower class people. And then there comes along this general, Pompey, who has his servant teach him Greek so he can read Greek literature. Well, once that happened, learning Greek was no longer being seen as the sissy thing to do. Because no one was going to accuse Pompey of being a sissy. Okay? Suddenly, everybody in Rome was learning Greek. Everybody was learning Greek. And by the time you get to Christ, almost everybody in Rome knew some Greek. So Greek was everywhere. And everybody back then knew it. So, you have to understand that what we're dealing here with is a lingua franca, a language of the world. And you do get these from time to time where certain languages tend to dominate. Back in the Bronze Age, it was the lingua franca was Akkadian. During the Iron Age, it was Aramaic. But by the Roman period, it was Greek. Okay? So, even the apostles knew this. And they would have spoken some Greek themselves. And definitely would have known people who were literate in Greek. So, that's the reason they would have written in Greek. Because everyone knew it. Didn't matter where they go. Didn't matter where they traveled. Didn't matter who they talked to. They would have known Greek. In fact, even in, say, the rituals of the Herodian temple, Greek was one of the two acceptable languages for prayer. This is one of those little-known facts, that the Sanhedrin authorized the use of Greek in temple prayers because it was considered to be such a beautiful language that it was as high liturgically as Hebrew was. So, with that said, so there was really Hebrew by this point also, we have to understand, was really sort of restricted to the Jewish community. And frankly, not every Jewish community spoke Greek. Like those in the diaspora, the ones that were, say, spread in other parts of the Roman Empire, like Asia Minor or in Syria. A lot of them didn't speak Hebrew anymore. But they all still spoke Greek. So for the sort of the gospel to get out, it had to be written in a language that everyone understood. And through God's providence, the only one that would really sort of fit the bill was Greek. Now, there have been some scholars, including a couple of church fathers, I think I think Papias was one of them, who suggested that some of the Gospels were written in Greek. I think he suggested that Matthew was written in Hebrew. I think Papias suggested that Matthew was originally written in Hebrew and translated into Greek. But most scholars dismiss that. The evidence for this is really not very good. It is true that Matthew has a lot of Hebraisms in it. But then again, you find a lot of Hebraisms also in, say, Mark and Luke as well. Not so much in Luke, but you do still find them. So I don't think the evidence for this is very strong. I don't think it's very strong at all. But it was really, the purpose of this was really to communicate to Jewish communities who weren't living in Israel anymore, essentially. You know, a lot of the Gospels were written, say, post the Nero persecution. And several of them, like, for example, like John, was written after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. You know, many of these Christians weren't even in, say, Israel anymore. Some of them had actually moved on to other places. Like, for example, John was living in Asia Minor. You know, his community is a Greek-speaking community. So when he writes his Gospel of John, he's surrounded by people who speak Greek. You know, interestingly enough, you know, his friends are Greek speakers. You know, because in his latter years, you know, he's having to go to the Roman baths as a treatment for his arthritis. That's one of the things that we hear about in, say, Eusebius, is that the Apostle John suffered from incredible arthritis. So he has to go to Roman baths. Well, who are you going to speak to at a Roman bath? Other Greek speakers, essentially. So we have to understand that the context of this world is Greek speaking. They all knew it. They all knew it. And this is why everything was written in Greek. Because, you know, even though the Old Testament is in Hebrew and a little bit of Aramaic, the world they're trying to reach, the populations of Jews they're trying to reach, no longer speak Aramaic or Hebrew. They're now speaking Greek. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. It's a great little it's a great question because it talks about, say, ethnography, how languages get distributed, basically how everyone was a polyglot. I mean, there's a whole lot of different factors here that are involved. But it does also tell us that there was one language that sort of bound the whole empire, that allowed them to sort of distribute things the way they were. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Our next super chat is from Brick Creation for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Yes. Hi, Dr. Falk. What theories other than the documentary hypothesis are there? Best to worst. You know, I've never ranked them, so it's going to be hard for me to do so, but I'll give you a few theories out there, competing theories. How well do they compete with the traditional biblical composition of the Pentateuch? Some better than others. I don't think the documentary hypothesis basically adequately accounts for the composition of the Pentateuch. Now, there are several other theories out there. Probably the next major competing theory, is called the supplementary hypothesis, where basically you have a core, say, Exodus Exodus and Leviticus that then gets added on with Deuteronomy and Genesis. Okay? And there's more than one type of supplementary hypothesis, too. There's also redaction theories as well that basically say that, well, you have a core Pentateuch that gets added on and then sort of changed over time. I think there's a grain of truth to all of these. Okay? And I'll even say this, I'll even give this concession. I think there's a grain of truth to even the documentary hypothesis. But it's not quite what people think it is. Okay. Now, that grain of truth in the documentary hypothesis is that the entire Pentateuch was not written by one person. Okay. We know this because the end of Deuteronomy, where it chronicles the death of Moses, was not written by Moses. We also know that there does seem to be editorial stringing. And what we mean by that is there does seem to have been several documents within the Pentateuch that seems to have been sort of smoothed together with, say, the addition of certain lines. Like, these are the words of Moses. Blank. Well, that tells you that somebody other than Moses wrote that these are the words of Moses. Okay? So this is what's called editorial string. They're not changing the document. They're just taking the documents and pasting them together to form bigger books. Okay? So I myself tend to go for a more editorial hypothesis. So that I definitely go with editorial string. I don't even think you can even make a case against editorial string. Redaction, I have a little more difficulty with. Redaction to update the language to, say, Hebrew. I do think, say, the earliest documents were written in a kind of a primitive, a common Canaanite tongue, maybe Amoritic, but then it does seem to be updated with endings and all that to represent Hebrew somewhere around the late Judges, early monarchy period. I'm okay with that. That's a change of spelling, but that's not a change of content. In that respect, I'm okay with, say, the idea of redaction, but when redaction goes on to say it's actually changing content, then I get antsy. I have a lot of problems with that. And not so much because I'm so against the idea of redaction. I just think it's just there's usually better explanations for why those readings exist other than that redactors came in and changed it. I sometimes think that's lazy scholarship, and that's the reason why I rail against it. It's not so much that I'm against the idea that that somebody came along and changed the biblical text. It's more that I think it's lazy scholarship. And lazy scholarship will invent artifices when they haven't really thought the issue all that through to see if there's perhaps another explanation. So I think when another explanation exists for why a certain reading exists, one shouldn't resort to a redactor. But I have no problem with the idea that the spelling was updated. And I think we have actually clear evidence that in many cases the spelling was updated just to reflect new forms of Hebrew. Because Hebrew does change over time. It actually changes quite dramatically. It doesn't even gel as a language until, say, roughly 1100. So, they're already in the Promised Land for about 100 years before Hebrew becomes fully saturated as Hebrew itself. They might have been speaking it earlier, but we don't quite see it in written form yet. So it does seem to be that the written system of Hebrew has to catch up to the spoken language. And that happens. That happens at times, where a spoken language will evolve a lot faster than the written language. I'm going to give you a great example from English. Like, for example, if you go to England, you'll see signs that say, "Ye Old Tavern." And old will usually be spelled OLDE. Okay? That is where the written language did not catch up to the spoken language. Because it isn't ye, it's the. Because the written language, that Y that you see at the beginning, isn't a Y. It's a letter called a thorn. And a thorn is a Old English letter that replaced the TH. Well, over time, the orthography of Thorn changed so it looks like a Y, and then people started actually replacing it with a Y. So when you see ye old, you should not be pronouncing that ye, you should be pronouncing that the old. Sorry, Renfarers. Not the same ring anymore. I'm going to get so much hate mail from the Ren Fair people. So much hate mail. But this is a case where the spoken language and the written language haven't kept pace. Same thing happens in biblical Hebrew. You got the spoken language of Hebrew first, and then the written language is catching up to that. Yeah, Camel Leopard just posted a Thorn. We need to bring back Thorn. I'd love to bring back Thorn. I think Thorn is a cool letter. Eth is also a cool letter. I'd love to bring back Eth too. Ash is still there, and so is Oath. But anyway, let's not get too into the weeds with Old English here. But Fam drafts heavily worded email. Okay. So anyway, I hope that gives you some explanation here of some of the theories out there, the supplemental hypothesis, the redaction theories, and I think some of the benefits and negatives of all of those. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Our next super chat is from Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Do you know about the recent extremely rare Ramses II era burial found in Israel? Yes, I have heard of it. Apparently it was found September 18th, a day before my birthday. Well, happy birthday! Now, they're still excavating this. They have not released a whole lot. They've released a few photos, but nothing suggested. All we know is that it's a tomb that dates to the era of Ramses II, second, and it's full of pottery. So it does look like it's an Egyptian-style burial in Canaan. Okay. We don't know anything more than this. We know that some of the pottery was painted red. So it does seem to be more along the lines of Canaanite-style pottery, not Israelite-style pottery, which we would totally expect. Since Ramses II is before the Israelite conquest. So yeah, there hasn't been so much released on this yet. I still want to see more. If there's a sarcophagus in there, that'd be cool. We don't know. As we said, there's a lot we still don't know about this burial. They've only just announced it. It was in a cave. It seems to be pretty much, at least for the most part, intact, although we haven't gotten any reports. But highly anticipating hearing more about this. But they haven't released more yet. So, so far, it's tantalizing. Just don't know much. Will this have a lot of impact upon our studies of the Bible? Probably not. But it is interesting nonetheless. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Oscar Filo for 30 Brazilian Real. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Good night, Doctor. In 1 Corinthians 6:15-16 says that when you sleep with a harlot, you become one flesh. Is that for sex in general? Yeah, I'd say that is for at least say normative sex. Yes, that would probably be true. So basically normal heterosexual intercourse, yes. What if the person is raped? That's a difficult question, because the question here is, does the one flesh mean one of voluntary union? There are several people who would have suggested that this is not for involuntary unions. There does seem to be not only a physical component, but also a spiritual component as well. So it's may not be the case that this applies to those involuntary unions. How does it work? We're not exactly sure. Okay, it's sort of an idea that two people are coming together to not just enjoy each other, but to procreate as well. Okay, so it's not even this is something that's very debated as to what does the one flesh mean. Does it mean that one in cause, one in union? Does it mean one in procreation? That the child is the melding of two flesh? We're not exactly sure, and scholars do debate this all the time. So they're still piecing that through. Then he asks a completely unrelated question. What if the person blasphemes the Holy Spirit? What happens? Well, okay. The blaspheming of the Holy Spirit is a very, very strange thing anyway. Because it only seems to apply in a certain place in a certain time. Which is that you have to more or less accuse Jesus Christ of being possessed by a demon. That's essentially what you have to do. And there's sort of a lack of opportunity to do that anymore, since he's sort of not around. So I don't think that this is one of those things that's really easy to accomplish anymore. I mean, I still guess it's technically possible, but I don't think it would have the same weight as, say, slandering Jesus Christ to everyone that he's possessed by Beelzebub. So, yeah, I don't think this is one of those things that happens. This was really a sin of opportunity, you know, that could only have taken place at the time of Christ. So, with that said, I don't think it's something that really can happen anymore for the most part. I think there could be exceptions to this, but if there is those exceptions, it's not even something you even commonly hear, really. Even say amongst the most ardent, say Jewish apologists these days. Jewish apologists these days will call Jesus Christ. They'll say he's insane, or they'll say he was delusional. But even they won't say he was possessed by a demon for the most part. So it's very, very rare to even anyone say this anymore. So, it's just, I think this is just one of those sort of sins of a certain period of time. So anyway, that's my thoughts on those questions. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. I'll just take this rejoinder here, just because I think this is actually I'm going to take this just because I saw this rejoinder here by Revelation. Blaspheming the Spirit is not blaspheming Christ. That would be forgiven, as he said. It is attributing to the works of Holy Spirit to Satan, not Christ. The context cleared that up. Yes and no. That's a yes and no kind of thing. The context is that Jesus is performing miracles through the Holy Spirit. Okay? That's the context. Okay? Because remember, the Holy Spirit, the Shekinah glory, is still behind the veil of the temple. Okay? The Holy Spirit has not come out. Now, the Holy Spirit is expressing his power through Jesus Christ. But it's not necessarily that it is just the works of the Holy Spirit. It's that Jesus Christ has done these miracles. And it's the Holy Spirit that empowers those miracles. And those miracles are being attributed to Satan. Okay? But it is only through that vector of Jesus Christ performing them and saying he's being possessed by a demon, by Beelzebub, that the Holy Spirit is being associated with Beelzebub. Okay? So it isn't quite that the works are being attributed by Satan. There's actually a historical sort of context there as well. So it's a little more complicated than that. But anyway, I do appreciate the rejoinder, and we did take that, but I think there's more to it than that. Okay, our next super chat. Left off. There we go. From Oscar Filo for 50 Brazilian real. Thank you again for the super chat. Good night, Dr. Folk. A friend of mine has doubts about the Shroud of Turin. I have doubts about the Shrouds of Turin. He saw that it has radiation involved. Anything you have to say about it will be welcome. Also, ask if there's, in order to see your videos. Also, my mom says hi. Well, say hello to your mother, too. Very, very much appreciate that. Your mother's watching as well. This is wonderful. So, hello. To Oscar's mom. Okay. My thoughts on the Shroud of Turin. I know people are going to... This is very debated. The Shroud of Turin is one of those things where it was an artifact that was brought back during the time of the Crusades. It's got some really sort of dubious provenance. We don't know where it originated from. Nobody does. But I also think that there's a factor here that I think makes it very problematic. And that problematic is that the biblical texts, those biblical texts seem to indicate that the shroud was made of two pieces. Okay? There seems to be a body piece and a face cloth. A cloth that just covered the face. The Shroud of Turin is made of one piece. Okay, it's made of one piece. One piece of linen. So we have a provenance problem, and then we got a biblical text problem. So I've got very deep reservations about the Shroud of Turin. The other thing is, when you would wrap this around an object in 3D, and we have to understand this does seem to have been something that is laid out flat, and the image of a person is on this. But if you visualize how it would look if it was wrapped around a body, you wouldn't get that outline. This is an outline that seems to be just something that was draped over someone, not wrapped around. Yeah, you get a really if you wrap something around a body and then you cut it and then unwrap it, you get a weird distortion that's not present in the shroud. Okay? I have some, as I say, I've got some really, really deep reservations of this, because this does not look like how a wrapping that goes around the body. And we know that these wrappings from 1st century Judea were wrapped around the body, not draped over top. If this was draped over top, this would make a lot more sense. But this isn't draped over top. This is supposed to be wrapped around it. So, I'm going to be very honest here. You'd also get, if this was, say, a radiation rating out, you should be getting not just the front side of Christ. You should also be getting the backside too. The Shroud of Turin does not show the backside. It only shows the front. It's very strange. If this is a shrouded wrap, it doesn't make sense. You know, geometrically, volumetrically, this doesn't make any sense. It does have all the earmarks, in my mind, of a counterfeit. Honestly, that's my thoughts on this. I would expect distortion of, as I said, the 3D image as it's wrapped around the person. If this was really a first century burial shroud, this does not look like a first century burial shroud, not in any way. So, I have, as I say, some really deep misgivings about this. Really deep misgivings. Just because, and frankly too, even if it was a very, very old linen, people did go into tombs, steal linens, and then recycle them to make counterfeits. They even did this in ancient times. So it isn't beyond somebody, even back in the... Because, if you were peddling off a counterfeit to, say, a crusader, most crusaders, even back then, were smart enough to know the difference between brand new linen and old linen. So, they would have to go into tombs. They'd have to find an old piece of linen. They would then paint on it and then bring it there. Okay? So, it's not beyond the possibility that this is old linen that was, say, recycled for the sake of passing off a counterfeit to a crusader. So, I do think that that it's not consistent in the way it should be for this to convince me, honestly. So anyway, I hope that helped. If the shroud's authentic, what are the implications? Not much. Really, it doesn't change anything. If the shroud is authentic, and, well, authentic in what way? Is it authentic to being a first century shroud of a crucified person? If it's authentic, it might give, say, more evidence of, say, burial customs. It wouldn't prove that it was, even if it was a shroud of a crucified person, it wouldn't prove that it belonged to Christ. And it certainly wouldn't prove that Christ was God. Because one of the things we have to keep in mind, too, is that natural evidence doesn't prove the supernatural. Natural evidence can prove historical questions, but it can't prove spiritual questions. It can't prove theological questions. Those are different questions and a different kind of, say, discussion or evidence. So I really think here that my honest opinion here is that even if it's legitimate, it doesn't matter, because it can't show you that Jesus Christ was God. We have more than enough evidence to show that Jesus Christ existed. Mythicists aside and their loony theories, we have more than enough evidence to show that Jesus was a real person who lived in the 1st century AD, who was crucified, he was buried, and his disciples say he rose again from the dead. Okay? We have more than enough evidence for all that. Besides that, if this is false, it doesn't take away anything either. So it's just one of those things that it doesn't add and it doesn't subtract. It's nothing. It really doesn't give us anything one way or the other. As far as I say, but I do think it's really not very good evidence, even if it were legit. It just doesn't look right. It doesn't pass the smell test. It doesn't test the smell test of what a burial shroud should be like. So, with that said, I want to thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that doesn't disappoint you. I know there's a lot of people who do believe in the Shroud of Turin. I want to be sensitive to those beliefs, but I think it's also important that we try to do this in truth and love as well. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for the super chat. I want to thank you for joining us tonight. You did ask some really great questions. And I appreciate the sincerity of this question, but that's my opinion on this. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. All right, mouthwash for $2. Thank you for the super chat. I saw your attempt to want to refund your money after you saw the other one. Okay. I'm sorry. It does happen sometimes, especially with these current events things, that that two people will ask the same question at the same time. So, uh, I don't know what to tell you other than I'm sorry. If you want to ask another question, feel free. Um, I can't refund your money. I mean, that's one thing power YouTube does not give me. Uh, once YouTube's got your money, it doesn't want to give it back. Funny that. Okay. But you are free to ask another question if you wish, and we'll honor that. But I do appreciate your support anyway. And I want to thank you for that. And I know a lot of these questions are not just to get the answers, but some of them are to just help support us. And we do appreciate every bit of support because that helps us, really helps us. And it helps us bring this to you every week. So, you are supporting the ministry, and I very, very much appreciate it. So, thank you so much, and I very, very much appreciate it. Okay. Next super chat is also from Mouthwash for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Do you know any unexplained pre-modern knowledge of modern scientific things? Like something that seems hard to believe it came about by accident. Cornish pasties. Yeah. How did the British back in the 7th century invent a pastry that was so hard that it could defy human reasoning? Yuck. Oh, Indians knowing the size of atoms. Well, people have been guessing these things for a while. Like the Greeks had an idea of atoms, and it's not anything like our modern notion of atoms. But they had that idea from natural science, from natural philosophy. Um, um, the whole idea of modern knowledge of a pre-modern knowledge of modern scientific things is a controversial one anyway, because we don't always know if they're talking about the same things exactly. Now, in some cases, it's pretty obvious. For example, the whole idea that the world was round. The Greeks figured that out through mathematics, and they got really, really close. They got close to within something like 10%. So the Greeks were very, very accurate about their estimates for the shape of the world. They knew it was a sphere. They knew its rough size. So they had some ideas. I mean, they had good ideas of observation. They could tell when, like, for example, weather cycles, agricultural cycles, these sorts of things. They were able to figure out time. We have to understand that these are the guys, the ancient peoples were the guys that figured out the solar year. They figured out the lunar month. They figured out, the utility of subdividing all that. So they had some good ideas based upon just simple observations of things that we sort of take for granted. Some of this stuff would, yeah, we'd refine it down to the microsecond, but they did all the heavy lifting. The Egyptians invented hydrology. How to make a channel so from the rivers to irrigate large swaths of land. They were the masters of hydrology. A lot of the mathematics were invented in Mesopotamia. 1,000 years before Pythagoras. There's a ostraca that has the Pythagorean theorem on it in Akkadian, 900 years before Pythagoras. Phenomenal. And they just figured it out by sheer reasoning. So, there's some sciences that they knew a lot better than others. They didn't know chemistry very well. They had a reasonable handle on biology, although there were some real gaffes there too. They had laid down some foundations for medicine. Physics is iffy. Astronomy. Yeah, they had done a lot of work on astronomy. They could figure out lunar tables with some reasonable accuracy. So they had some things that they knew pretty well. Some things though they missed the mark on. So, and no, there's no light bulb in Dendara Temple. It's a lotus plant. Sorry, ancient aliens theorists. By the way, if you ever get the chance to go down into that Chamber of Secrets at Dendara Temple, do so. It is so cool. It's beautiful. Absolutely stunning. I think they sort of do it. The ancient aliens theorists do that Chamber of Secrets a disservice. It's hard to get into. It's really hard to get into, by the way. I mean, you have to go to kind of this back room, and they open up this grate, and you have to climb down into this, 2-foot tunnel, and you crawl into this cramped tunnel, and you make your way to this split chamber, and the chamber's really long. And the chamber is decorated on both sides by alabaster. So it's really stunning. It's really beautiful. Carvings are weird, but they're really beautiful. But we would expect that from Ptolemaic carvings, because Ptolemaic carvings tend to go overboard on certain aspects. But it's absolutely stunning. Hard to get into, hard to get out, but well worth it. Yeah, you basically got to get on your hands and knees to get in there. It's ridiculously difficult. But Dendara is a beautiful temple anyway. Nevertheless, I'll say this about Dendara Temple. There's no ancient aliens there. There's no helicopter there. There's no spacecraft there. There's no light bulbs there. Okay? Okay, he wants to know if there's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sushi wants to know what about the computer in ancient Greece? It's not a computer. It's actually, you're talking about the antiquity, the mechanism. It's a geared mechanism. So it's a set of gears that are stacked. So think of this kind of like a clock. Now, one of the things we have to understand about Greek and Roman technology is there's a lot that's lost. One of those things is we do know that they were actually really, really good at making what's called automata. Yeah. For example, we have descriptions of, say, the pool of Herod at the Herodian. There was a pool there that ancient texts tell us that there were these ducks, these birds, that were automated, that they would dip their beaks in the water in an automated fashion. We do know that they could make gears. We do know they were actually very good at making gears. So they had the technology to make lots and lots of things with gears. So the Antikythera device is an application of that technology. And that device seems to have been done to predict the moving of, say, cycles of the stars, particularly the planets and moon, and probably for ritual purposes. So they can predict certain festivals and certain cycles and that sort of thing. But one of the things we're learning about this is that for example, those gears were not just say, a post, but they also had, say, shift mechanisms in those gears too that you don't find until like late clocks of the 19th century. I mean, some really sophisticated stuff with gears. But they had already learned those tricks back in, say, the 3rd century BC. Yeah, but there's a lot of these stories of automata in, say, the first during the Hellenistic period. So that isn't so much, say, modern scientific knowledge things, but it does say that, hey, these are not stupid people either. These are people that did very, very sophisticated things with what they had. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. I hope that engaged the question at least. But I will say, for example, those Cornish pastries are the hardest substance known to man. No doubt. It still boggles the modern mind. Okay, let's get fire up Twidget here. And it doesn't look like we have as many super chats as we normally do, so we might get through these very, very quickly tonight. We might even be done before 2 hours. Who knows? I wondered if they're going to actually let me have that. I doubt it. See here. Okay, I think I see one here from Mouthwash. Okay, Mouthwash for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Egypt is a undeveloped country with 100 million people living in an area smaller than Belgium. Is this sustainable? Will Egypt collapse in the future? That's always hard to say. A lot of things have changed in Egyptian culture in the last even 10 years. It's radically changed in the last 50. Now, we do have to understand about some things about that 100 million people. First of all, most of those 100 million people are young people. They're young people. They're people under the age of 30. And a lot has changed in Egyptian culture between, say, those under 30 and those over 30. Those under 30 are not getting married anymore. A lot of young people in Egypt no longer get married. They're shacking up in some cases. They're developing more Western kinds of, say, dating habits. Now, those over 30, you do still find a few people in Egypt few men who have multiple wives. I encountered one of those in the airport. Very traditional Islamic guys with 2 wives. Okay? That's passé now. People under 30, if they get married at all, will basically be monogamous. And that's just a change in the culture. So I don't know if that 100 million is going to be sustainable. In some cases, it's a matter of economics. A lot of people aren't getting married because it's expensive to get married. People are saying, hey, it's not worth it. Men have jobs, women have jobs. Yeah, it's too expensive to get divorced. No one wants to go through. The women don't want to go through an Islamic law divorce where they get completely shafted. Men don't want to go through a divorce either because if they lose, well, they lose some property. They lose a lot. So, and they still have to take care of the kids. Men get the kids. You know? So, yeah, it's just become a matter that the attitudes between the generations here have shifted so dramatically. Now, the other factor here is that while the population is living in a very, very small area, and most of them are living around Cairo, if we're honest here. Cairo, Giza, that area. Egypt is also creating new agricultural land left, right, and center. Right now, Egypt is a food exporter. It's not a food importer, it's a food exporter. It actually produces more food than it needs right now. So even though it's got 100 million mouths to feed, those mouths are being fed. When I first went to Egypt in 2013, you could still see starving people on the street. You could see starving people. Today, you go to Egypt, you see fat people everywhere. It's a radical change. They can't build diabetes clinics now fast enough. And I'm not joking about this. You know, when I was, last time I was in Egypt, I stayed at a hotel where the manager, the owner of the hotel, had to make an emergency trip to Cairo because his son got hospitalized at a diabetes clinic because he went into a diabetic coma. Well, that doesn't happen overnight. You know. And his son had type 2 diabetes. You know, type 2 diabetes at the age of 25? Yeah, that just doesn't normally happen immediately. There's something there that led up to that. So you know, there's a lot of factors that are happening right now in Egypt that I don't think will lead to necessarily to collapse. If anything, what I think is going to happen in Egypt in the next, say, 30 years is they're going to continue to produce more and more agricultural land. They've got a surplus of water right now at Lake Nasser. They got too much water at Lake Nasser. They got so much water at Lake Nasser that the dam is being risked because the water levels are getting so high that it's threatened to flow around the banks. So, what they're starting to do is they're starting to funnel off that water into agricultural land that they're basically terraforming up at past Aswan. Basically between Aswan and Abu Simbel. You know, when I went out there in 2019, I saw them putting up these sort of experimental farms. They weren't complete yet, but you could start seeing the beginnings. They were planting date trees up there, and they were planting fields up there. They were laying the groundwork, so they were clearing out the rocks, trying to rehabilitate the soil, trying to make it appropriate for agriculture. And they're going to use a lot of that water from Lake Nasser to create new crops, new plants, new farms up there. So a lot of this is going to how much they continue to be able to grow their agriculture. I think it's going to depend a lot on, say, what treaties the Egyptians will work out with Sudan. Because Sudan's making right now its own dams. And Sudan wants its own hydroelectric power and its own supply of water and wants to sort of cut off Egypt. So how that works out between Sudan and Egypt will determine a lot of what happens. But I also think that we're going to see population decline eventually in Egypt as well. As I say, the nuclear family is not what it once was in Egypt. People aren't doing the nuclear family anymore like they once did. And they're certainly not having multiple wives anymore. Yeah. No one's putting up with that anymore. So, I expect to see a population decline start in Egypt. And just like we've seen in the West. There's too many people, too many now professionals in Egypt who want to have a career. who don't want the same burdens that a previous generation wanted. So I think the population is going to decline. I think agriculture is going to increase. I don't see imminent collapse in Egypt in the foreseeable future. But if anything, they might have a manpower shortage at some point. And that's a different kind of collapse. We're starting to see this in some places like Japan, where you have an aging population and young people are not producing families to replace their numbers. So they could have a manpower shortage. They won't have a population, basically, a Rawlsian population explosion or collapse, as it were. So I don't think this is something. I think we've seen the height. I think we've already hit the peak of Egypt's population. I think from now on we're just going to start seeing it decline. So anyway, that's my thoughts on what's going to happen in Egypt's future. I'm not a prophet, but that's the trend I'm seeing right now. I expect to see diabetes clinics grow. They just can't build them fast enough right now. Population is well fed. They are experiencing inflation because of their prosperity at the moment. So there might be some political unrest there. But, you never know exactly what the future holds for I will say this. Standard of living has improved dramatically in Egypt in even just the last 10 years. Dramatically improved. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. All right. I have a super sticker here from Jamie Russell, Christian Miller for $1.49. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Is there a question with that? I'm above it. Okay. I see. Okay. Last time you answered my question about Daniel 9:27, you said the Hebrew reflects a wave sheath. Can you explain? I don't even know what that is. Okay. I don't think I said that, but let's take a look at what that is. Daniel. You'll have to forgive me here. I don't exactly remember what you asked last time. Daniel 9:27. Here, okay. And he will make a firm covenant for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to the sacrifice and the grain offering. Okay. And on the wing of all abominations will come one who makes desolate even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed and poured out on one who makes desolate. Well, there is that firm covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of that 1 week, and we did talk about that, that's the abomination that makes desolate. And the desolation is the end of the sacrifices, essentially. And it's the variety of sacrifices, whatever those happen to be, the sin offerings, the grain offerings. But it does require a structure, an infrastructure that does necessitate the existence of a temple, okay, or at least a good tabernacle. Israel's not using a tabernacle at the moment, so, and has no prospects for using the tabernacle. So, I think that although there's one apparently a tabernacle in the desert somewhere that if they ever wanted to go back to the tabernacle, they could. Oh, you didn't know about that? That somebody had made a recreation of a tabernacle? Yeah. Hey, the tabernacle's ready to go. Yeah, like the ark at the Ken Ham's Park. A recreation, yes. But it does require something that is biblically sanctioned. So there's a biblically sanctioned place, because you can't do a sacrifice and you can't do a grain offering just anywhere. You need a temple. You need a temple, you either need a tabernacle, you need some sort of sacred space to do a grain offering. Okay? Now, I didn't actually mention the wave sheath offering. I think you must have gotten that somewhere else. But it is a grain offering, and there's several grain offerings. There's not just one. Um, but you can see here that there is, and I believe the sacrifice is that Ola. The Bach. It's just a sacrifice in general. Okay, so it's not even a burnt offering. So just sacrifices in general. And the grain offering is the Minkach. Yeah, so that's a grain or gift offering. So I don't see here that it's not specific on which sacrifice it is, but it could be any number of sacrifices here could apply. But I don't understand exactly what you're driving at here with this question. Other than it is a stop to the sacrifice. The sacrifice, it does imply that there was a continuity of the sacrifice. And then stopped, and then on the wing of abominations, it will one who makes desolate, even a complete destruction of the temple, and one that's decreed and poured out on the one who makes desolate. Okay. So, I believe that is after Messiah. Yes. Because this takes place after Messiah in verse 26. And verse 26, it says, Then after 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. That happened in 70 AD. And its end will come with a flood. Even to the end, there will be war. Desolations are determined. So, anyway, I can't really expound on that more, other than that the normal temple cycle of sacrifices will be interrupted. So, unless you care to be more specific, it's hard for me to answer this with more clarity than I think I've already have. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for that super chat, that super sticker. Thank you very much for the question, but that's the best I can do given with what you've given me here. So, thank you very much. Okay, next one from Kwame-Adu07 for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Hi, Dr. Falk. Have you heard of the Samson seal? Yes, I have. I have heard of this. It dates the 11th century, and it was found at Beit Shemesh. Yes, it was. Very provocative, isn't it? Depicts a man with 7 braids fighting a lion. Yes. Yes, it does. Now, interestingly enough, Beit Shemesh and Samson are actually related terms, believe it or not. Beit Shemesh is house of the sun. Okay, and here in this case, the sun god, Shemesh. Okay, this is the Mesopotamian sun god. Also the god of justice. Samson actually means little Shemesh. So there's a relation here. There's definitely a link here between Samson and Shemesh, Beit Shemesh. Very, very interesting just on this little thing alone. That the mother of Samson is one of two women in the Bible to receive a double theophany. She receives a double theophany from the Lord. And then she gives her son a pagan name. Yeah, that's interesting. Now, I don't recall if the Samson seal, just let me take a look at the picture of this, because I don't recall if it has any writing on it. Let's see if I... Yeah, there's no writing on it. It's just a man fighting a lion. Okay, so it's hard to say if this actually relates to Samson itself or if this is just a motif that is reminiscent of Samson. Because, Samson's not the only guy who fights a lion. King David fought a lion also. However, because it does come from Beit Shemesh, it is very provocative. I will give it that. So we do know that the motif is there at least dating to the 11th century BC. So that is actually good evidence that the motif at least existed of a Samson-like figure. So there's a whole lot of very interesting, say, coincidences here. Or at least correlations. Got a man fighting a lion on an 11th century seal at Beit Shemesh. That's interesting. It's very provocative. It's very interesting. It's not ironclad proof, but it is a piece of evidence that weighs the incident as being more likely. And, given Samson's history, yeah, we would sort of expect something like this. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat and very much appreciated. One, two, three, four, five sushi for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Deanne Loper says Gnosticism depends on Kabbalah. True? No. Well, there's some people who've suggested that Kabbalah was influenced by Gnosticism, but I don't know anyone serious who says that Gnosticism depends upon Kabbalah. Now, you read the Kabbalah, you get a very sort of Gnostic vibe from it. A very, very Gnostic vibe from it. But Gnosticism itself long predates Kabbalah. It predates Kabbalah by at least 1400 years. So, I don't think it's true that Gnosticism came out of Kabbalah. There's no evidence that Kabbalah existed prior to the 13th century AD. It's essentially an outgrowth of medieval Jewish mysticism. And it's very, I would say, the idea that mysticism picked up some Gnosticism along the way is very conceivable because we know that Gnosticism was all through medieval Europe. It survived as Hermeticism through medieval Europe. So it is not inconceivable that medieval European Jewish communities picked up some of that Hermetic thought and then incorporated it into Kabbalah. Hermetic writings would be something that would be very congruent with Kabbalah. And we do know that Jewish communities in the medieval period did read widely. So I think it's more the other way around. I think it's more that Kabbalah ingested Gnosticism and then incorporated it into its teachings. So that's my opinion on this. The Gnosticism way predates Kabbalah, way predates it. But Kabbalah does seem to have had some influence by Gnosticism. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helped. Very much appreciate it, and good question. The Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is there significance to the lack of a definite article before the numbering of days in Genesis 1 prior to day 6? Second day, sixth day, etc. Okay. This is going to depend on who you ask. It's the the numbers do seem to be more ordinal than cardinal. So it's more like or cardinal than ordinal. So it's more like day 2, day 3, or third day. I mean, but really, it seems to be day 2, more along that line. Let me just look up Genesis 1. Yeah, it's an ordinal number. So it'd be a second day. So, so it's not, these aren't cardinal numbers. So a second day, a third day, a fourth day, etc. It does seem to be numbering them off. I don't know if there's any specific significance to that. There does seem to be sort of the idea of framing here. The idea that you have each act of creation sort of segmented and encapsulated in its own day. Some people will say, okay, this is suggestive of say a very long period of time. You know, like the old Earth creationists will say that. Some people will say that, oh, this is evidence of a 24-hour period of time, like the young Earth creationists will. I don't think you can really tell one way or the other. So I don't think there's significance here, but it does. The lack of an article here really doesn't give us something one way or the other. So it's one of those things where it almost seems to be that if there is significance in here, it's almost in the eye of the beholder. So this is why I try to be a little more circumspect about this. I try to see, passages like this, in particular, framing a wording like this, as with humility, because we can't be sure. We just can't be sure. So with that said, there's no way we can really tell one way or the other if this is supposed to mean something else per se. It could. It might. And I'm just going to leave it at that because we don't know. But there's nothing specific in the exegesis here that gives us significance one way or the other. That's the that's the takeaway. That's the takeaway. There's a lack of exegetical evidence here that would give us guidance to how to take it. Okay? So if we go sort of beyond that, we sort of get into the territory of eisegesis, where we start reading what we want into the text. And once you start reading what you want into the text, you're in dangerous territory at that point. So this is why we have to always exercise humility before the text. So anyway, probably not the most helpful answer, but it's probably the best I can give you, because if we go too far, then we get into trouble. There's just not enough evidence there. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay. Cooley27 for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Folk like an Egyptian. Okay. Regarding the Merneptah Stele, if it's Jezreel, not Israel, and I don't think it's not Jezreel. What's the next historical reference to Israel? Latest possible Exodus plus conflict, ended Dynasty 20 was chaotic. Okay. It's not Jezreel. It's Yisrael. Okay. It's a sheen, or it's a scene. Okay. It's a Yisra. Okay. Not a Zion. So it's not Jezreel. There's no way you can interpret this as Jezreel. At least I don't think Jezreel is spelled with a scene. Check though. Alia Jezreel. Yeah, yeah. It's a Zion. Yeah, you would see this in the Egyptian if this was a Zion. Okay. They would be using something like a danja or some other um or a form of T. The Egyptians did have letters that did emulate a Zion. Okay, so we would see this in the orthography of, say, the Merneptah Stele, if this was supposed to be a Zion. And we have to kind of understand that the rules of transliteration between Egyptian and say Israelite and Canaanite words were very particular. It wasn't freewheeling. These are very, very particular ways of doing things. So we would have to really take into that account before we could even broach a reading such as Jezreel. And I just don't think that reading is possible here. You know, you know, Jezreel even has an ion in it. It's got two gutturals, three if you could include the resh, but it's got an ion and an aleph. This is something that we would see extant in the writing of the Merneptah Stele, and we just don't. We would see probably the arm, because that seems to be the normal transliteration. So if you find an ion in a Canaanite word, it usually shows up as the arm in an Egyptian transliteration. So I don't think this is viable. I don't think this is viable at all. That is Jezreel. Okay. So, and furthermore, it can't be Jezreel for another reason, which is that because there's the people determinative. Israel in the Merneptah Stele is not a place; it's an ethnonym. It is an ethnonym because it's got the people marker at the end, the determinative. In Egyptian, words have determinatives because Egyptian language was very homonymic. The same words were used for multiple things. So they had to keep their homonyms separate by adding pictures at the end of the words to give you clues of what the word means. In the case of Israel, you have the people determinative, which is a seated man, a seated woman, and the multiple determinative underneath to show you it's many people. It's a large people group. You also had the stick determinative, which is used of, say, Asiatic people groups. Okay? So this is not a place. It's an ethnonym. It's a wandering tribal group. And it's paired, and that whole Merneptah Stele is paired in couplets. Okay? And each couplet is meant to compare like things. It compares the Libyans to the Hittites. Both sort of great alliances. It compares Canaan and Gaza, cities on the coastal plain. Canaan probably being Ashkelon. It also compares Yenoam and Gezer, two cities in the Shephelah. And then it compares the Hurrians, in the Bible known as the Hivites. Then these were a wandering group of sojourners, basically the remnants of the Mitanni Empire, with the Israelites. Okay? So really, when it talks about, when you see translations of the Merneptah Stele, it should not actually be translated as Israel. It should be the Israelites, because this is an ethnonym. It's a name of a people group, not a place. So, um, with that said, now your question is, what is the next historical reference to Israel? And we actually don't get one for quite a while. I don't know. I think the next one actually is in the, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's the Stele, which is in the 9th century. Um, so I think the next one comes a lot later, a lot later. So this was a really earth-shattering discovery when this was made by Flinders Petrie. It was really not expected. This was one of those things that was completely out of the blue when they discovered this, and they discovered multiple copies of this. This isn't the only copy of the Merneptah Stele. There's actually two of them. So there's one actually in the British Museum, but not the British Museum. The Cairo, I guess it's the Gem now. I think they moved it finally to the Gem. The other one is still at Karnak. There's still one at Karnak, a copy of this. Um, so I think there's very much um, there's very good support that this does say Israel, not Jezreel. Okay, and as I said, the next reference comes, and I think it's Iron Age, so it's a lot later, lot later. Now, latest possible date of Exodus and Conquest, end of 20th dynasty was chaotic. Yeah, I wouldn't put it at the Dynasty 20. I think the latest possible date for the Exodus is, you'd have to say, the terminus antiquem of, and that's the latest date it could be, is the Merneptah Stele itself, which is 1217 BC. So I put the Exodus between 1265 to 1217 BC, and I lean more to 1265 because that gives ample time for the wandering period. So you do need time for that too. So you do need to say, okay, you've got the earliest documented time when the Israelites are in Canaan. That is the Merneptah Stele. Very few people would doubt that these days. I mean, yeah, you still get some minimalists out there that do, and they're off in left field. Um, but then you have to say take out you know roughly 40 years. You don't have to go exactly 40 years. So at least you can't it's really difficult to put the Exodus much later than say 1257 BC. So once you get past 1257, you start getting into some difficulties at that point. It's possible. It's still possible, but it gets more and more difficult to pull off. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. It's a good question, and people do try to strain the gnat here. But then again, too, they don't know the rules of transliteration between the two languages. I mean, a lot of biblical scholars do this because they don't know Egyptian. They just don't know. They don't know the languages. Yeah, sure, they're great at Hebrew. They know their Hebrew well. They even know their Greek well, and they even know their Aramaic well. They don't know their Egyptian. Egyptian is a rare skill. It's a really rare skill in biblical studies. I really think that more people should pick up, Egyptology, because it gives you insight into these little details. And if you've got this insight into these little details, and it's the little details that make this all work, you can then figure out the one from the other. You can definitely say, okay, this is definitely Israel. It cannot be Jezreel. As I say, this is something I moan about. I moan about this. Because I really think that a lot of biblical studies would benefit from more Egyptology. But they're also doing some hedge protection too. They're trying to be gatekeepers to their discipline. And I can't really fault them for that. I just think the whole discipline suffers for it. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. very, very much appreciate it. And it was a great question. Uh, Matthew Harrell for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Folk. I hope you do, or you're well. Well, thank you. I'm doing well. I'm trying to prepare myself mentally and physically for my upcoming debate with Titus Kennedy. I'm trying to get lots of sleep. I'm trying to make sure I'm eating well and um, cutting back a little bit on the alcohol. So the date will be October 19th, and it will be on Sean McDowell's channel. So yeah, I'm trying to prepare myself like an athlete does. Okay. And you ask, sorry to rabbit trail there. Do you think Isaiah 40:66 was written by the prophet Isaiah or one of his disciples? I think it was written by Isaiah. The reason why is because the whole book of Isaiah does seem to have a, how do I say this? A reflective structure. It does seem to be easily divisible in half, where it's leading off to a certain point, and then it sort of back traces itself all the way up to book 66 or chapter 66. So I don't think it was written by his disciples. It does seem to be an intentional literary structure. Now, I also think too that Isaiah might not have written this in one go. Okay, I think he might have written this over many years, collected his papers just like Moses did, and then organized it in a certain way. And he might have even rewritten certain sections as he did it. As the prophet, that's his prerogative. Okay, but I do see it does seem to be an intentional structure. It does seem to be an intentional literary structure. And once you see intentionality in a literary structure, you do have to sort of question whether it's one author. And I mean, question is affirm that it's one author. Because we do see this in other pieces of literature also, where, say, changes in genre don't necessitate change in authorship. And I think this is the problem I have with a lot of the literary technique that's applied to, say, Isaiah, is there is a change in sort of tone and particularly structure, and then there's this assumption, oh, it's a change in structure, there's a change in author. I don't think that's necessarily true. Unless I see more evidence that suggests, and you gotta go with the evidence, you can't just say, oh, there's prophecy here that accurately predict the future, therefore it's another author. Because here's the thing, the prophet Isaiah predicts that there'll be Cyrus that comes and frees the people. Okay. Now, one of the things we have to kind of understand is that Cyrus the Great was not the first Cyrus. He's Cyrus the second. Cyrus the first lived during the time of Isaiah. The name was known to Isaiah. So he could have easily just said, okay, foresee another another Cyrus coming. That's easily within the purview of possibility of the prophet. You don't need another author to prophesy like that. You just need a prophet that can be recontextualized in another period for that to work. Here's the thing that one of the things I really sort of grates on me with some of these critical scholars is they see a prophecy come true and they think, oh, ex eventu prophecy. Well, why can't it be recontextualization? What's the problem with recontextualization? It's all through ancient prophecy. It's everywhere. Why can't it be that? Why does it have to be a new author? It's silly. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. It's like these people never passed literature class. Yeah, they passed their ancient Near Eastern, their biblical studies, but they never passed literature. Okay, now I'm going on a rant. Sorry. This is me sober, by the way. He goes on rants about literature when he's sober. Okay, so in all seriousness, in all seriousness, however, I think this is more the poverty of the exegete more than say that Isaiah 40:42-66 was written by one of Isaiah's disciples. Honestly, I see no compelling reason to suggest that the second half of Isaiah, or Isaiah 2 as it's sometimes called, was written by anyone other than Isaiah himself. It's just unnecessary. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that helped. Okay. Revelation for $4.99. Thank you for the super chat. If I follow this up with a $20 super chat, will you take down your sweet SG and rock for a minute? No. I live in an apartment. I will not take down the SG and rock, even for a $20 super chat. I'll thank you for the $20 super chat, but I'm not gonna go rock. You may have heard my music at some point. Okay, I'll say that. You might have heard it at some point, but I'm not going to identify it. All right. Honestly, I tend to do a lot more composition than I actually do performance. I'm not a performer. I do compose. And I do it with headphones, and I do it quietly, and I do it with sheet music. I do it with sheet music, and then I hand it off to somebody else to play. Okay? Because that's what composers do. So, but I'm not a performer. Okay? So while I'll use my guitar for doing for composing and for working out ideas, I don't rock out. Sorry. As much as it might be tempting to hear me rock out, you probably would be very disappointed anyway. So, hey, if my wife points out, if we ever get financially blessed to the point where we can own our own place and have a garage which can be soundproofed, then she's fine with me rocking out. But until it would probably take a lot more than that $20 to get me to a point where you would want to hear me rock out. All right, so I appreciate the super chat, but sorry, a performance is not going to happen. Okay, so thank you for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Oh, by the way, if I did rock out, you'd be probably hearing Bach. Okay? Because frankly, I mean, I'll be very honest, I play more Bach on my guitar than anything else. Okay? I play Fur-Elise on my guitar. Okay? Bach is great on a guitar. I love playing Bach on a guitar. It's interesting. It inspires ideas. It's It's really some interest. Bach has some really interesting stuff, and I have his entire sheet collection, and I just basically pick stuff from Bach's sheet music, and I'll play it on the guitar, and I really enjoy that. I mean, yes, it is an SG, it is an Epiphone SG Pro, but I use it much more like a classical instrument, just because it's I just that's what I really enjoy doing is basically playing Bach. So if you heard it, you would not be. It probably would not be what you would expect. Okay. So with that heads up, thank you very much for the super chat. I very very much appreciate it. No. That is a cute comment. Put that up there. Saint Ronan writes, "When you're metal but want to impress that cute girl that plays lyre." Yeah. Play Bach. You can't go wrong with Bach. All right, let's get back to the super chats here. Right here. Hey, Matthew Harrell for $5. Thank you so much for the super chat. I don't have any more questions. I just want to stop in and show a little support and say I'm still watching. Good to see you. Have a good night. God bless. Well, thank you very much, and God bless you too. We appreciate people who just want to support us as well. You know, we do these live streams as a way of giving back to the community, and this always was the intention. You know, we never intended this to be a fundraiser per se. We'd always intended this to answer people's questions, and people have rallied around us, have rallied around this ministry, and are really supporting it. And we have been both humbled and overwhelmed by this because, you know, we never expected it. We never asked for it. There's never once we've never asked anyone to do a super chat. Never once. We don't ask people to give super chats. Just people do it voluntarily out of the goodness of their hearts, out of the abundance that God has given them. And we thank them and we praise God for this, because it's just, we're blessed by this. We're really, really blessed by this. It was an outpouring of grace, grace from God, grace from our live chat participants that we never expected. We never expected this, so we are just so grateful for all of this. So, you know, when you just want to give us support, you know, we thank you and we appreciate it. Uh, and we just are still surprised by it, honestly, because we just didn't expect it. We just never expected it. As I said, you know, earlier in the live stream when we first started doing this, as I said, our humble beginnings as a YouTube channel, and a year later we decided to start doing live streams as sort of a way to, you know, do questions in a more structured manner, to give back to the community. And it was just we did not expect, you know, this response, and we're just so grateful and so appreciative. So I want to thank you very much for that super chat, and we very much appreciate it. All right, Sean Horton for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat, and it's good to see you here tonight. Are there any ideas on what's going on with Esau being so noticeably hairy from birth? Genesis 25:25. I will pull that up and we will read it, but I'm My first thought is not necessary. Okay. We'll start with verse 23 here, because I think a little context might be helpful. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 people shall be separated from your body, and 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. When her days were to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. Now, the first came out, for the first came forth red, all over like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau. Okay. And afterward his brother came forth with his hand holding on to Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob, and Isaac was 66 years old when she gave birth to. Okay. The idea that Esau comes out red and hairy is a sign of masculinity. In a sense, hyper masculinity. Okay. Now, it is no secret that men generally have more hair than women. We've got facial hair, lots of it. At least if we let it go out of control. Women generally have less hair than men, and part of the reason is because men have testosterone. The higher your testosterone levels, the more hair you generally have. It's not completely true, but it's often the case. So what we see here is the sort of the what's called the pre what's it called in literature when you pre no, when you predict something, you say something earlier in a foreshadowing. Okay, this is foreshadowing. Yes, Esau was a Giga Chad. This is foreshadowing. It's foreshadowing. Okay? It's showing you that already at birth, he is sort of foreshadowed to be a Giga Chad, essentially. Very masculine. Red, the whole idea of red being red is particularly ruddy is really another way of saying this. Adamonai. I think it's the word. Let me see. Yeah. Admonai. Admoni. 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 It's the word that actually the root word for this is Adam. Same word as say like the first human in the human race, Adam. Adam is the red earth, the clay, the red clay. It's also from the word where we get red and ruddy from. So it's a sign of masculinity. It is the paramount sign of masculinity. The hairy, and covered all in hair, that's the secondary sign. So these are signs of pure masculinity. Okay? He's athletic. He's a hunter. He cares about physical things. He cares about this world. Okay? That's why he gives up his birthright. Okay? All of this is foreshadowing his giving up his birthright. He basically he doesn't care about spiritual things. He cares about the hunt. He cares about the athletics. That's what he cares about. So when he loses his birthright because he gives it away, okay, he's now angry because he sees his short-sightedness. But short-sightedness because of the trajectory he took. He didn't care about spiritual things. He's a man's man. He's athletic. He's hunting. Even when he departs from Isaac, marries and departs, and he comes back with a full tribe, and they're powerful people because he has passed on those traits of masculinity. Still doesn't care about spiritual things. But he's also wise enough too to set some of his anger aside. When he does finally encounter Jacob, he doesn't exact vengeance. He doesn't exact vengeance. He accepts Jacob, as a brother, because he's learned some hard life lessons. So, but that's what's going on here is that the with the hairiness and the ruddiness, this is the sign of extreme masculinity. That's what this is all showing up. And you see this right from the contrast here is that Esau is the masculine one. He's the athlete. Jacob's the clever one. He's the trickster. Heel catcher. Now, Jacob doesn't actually is a, and even that's a pun. Jacob means it's a pun that means heel. It also means to help. And Jacob is an old name in Canaanite. It's a really old name. It's we do find it extant as Jacob Baal and Jacob El. And it's often like God helped or Baal helped. So it's a really old Canaanite name, but it also has a double meaning. And that double meaning means to heal too. So we've got that sort of the idea that Jacob is grasping on to Esau to help him out. So he's kind of using a few dirty tricks even at birth. Maybe not intentionally, but there's that foreshadowing here that's at play. So you get this is all foreshadowing to set up the conflict between Esau and Jacob. So that's what's going on here. Anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And our next super chat. As again from Sean Horton. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate that. Where's a place in the Old Testament you wish you could peek around the corner and see what went on that the author didn't include? Ooh. Where will I look? Okay. I know exactly the place. Okay? The encounter between Abraham and Pharaoh. I want to be there at that castle. At the palace. Peeking around the corner at Ichitawi. That's probably where this took place. Probably took place at Ichitawi, near the Fayum. At the residence of one of the 13th dynasty kings. I want to be there, and basically seeing the interaction between Abraham and whatever pharaoh he was actually engaged with, or king. There were no pharaohs at that time. They're all kings of Egypt at that point. But I'd love to see which king it was. I'd love to see the setup of the court, because Ichitawi has never been excavated. It's possibly been identified, but it has not been excavated. I'd love to see what the palace looked like. I'd love to see the interaction between the court and Abraham. Oh, there's so many details there that I'd love to see. I'd love to see how the viziers were doing their business on the royal court. so much that I'd love to see between that interaction between Abraham and the king of Egypt. So that's the one I'd love to take a peek around the corner of. Lots of details that are missing from that particular interaction that could be so interesting and so useful. I wish there was more information in that interaction, because that could have given us a lot of historical information that we just have. So anyway, that's the answer to that question. Thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciated. Sean Horton for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. How would a reader or listener notice a chiasmus that spans 10 chapters of Genesis? Jacob's story, 25, 1930 to 35, 1 to 22a. How does missing a chiasmus affect interpretation? Well, that's very interesting. A listener might not notice it. A reader is more likely to notice it. And the reason why a reader is more likely to notice it is, one of the things is, you can read faster than you can listen. Now, we have to understand, too, a lot of reading in the ancient world was done out loud. A lot of it was done out loud. In fact, the whole practice of silent reading seems to be a fairly recent invention. Silent reading doesn't seem to have taken place much until, say, the Middle Ages with the monastic movement. But we do have episodes, for example, in the ancient world where people are reading and are disturbed. Someone starts reading and they go, ah! So, we do see this in certain texts. But it's more likely to be noticed on reading. Because even if they're doing it with a low voice, they're probably being able to cover a whole lot more text reading a text than reading a scroll than they are by listening to a scroll. In fact, they're probably less likely to notice it listening than they are reading it. Now, does that necessarily mean that this was laid out with a reader in mind? Not necessarily. But it is also very possible, too, like, for example, with one of the things we've learned from, say, the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I have a different view on the Dead Sea Scrolls than a lot of people do, which is, I think what we have, for example, of the Dead Sea Scrolls is actually a papyrus shop, essentially. Basically, they're making readers' copies. Because we have so many different copies of so many different texts, it does seem that they're gathering texts in and making duplicates of them for reproduction and distribution. A lot of that comes from, say, the particular ethos at the time in, say, Jerusalem and Judea, where people owned personal copies of some of these texts. They were probably expensive. Don't get me wrong, they were probably still expensive, but it would have been a really good money-making proposition for the Essenes. So I do think that there is the possibility, and plus we have to also understand, in the Roman Empire too, they were public libraries. Okay, public libraries were part of the institutions of the state, and they would supply not just Roman texts, but also a lot of local texts as well. So back during the Roman Empire, you could go to a Roman Empire, you could pick up a Genesis scroll, and you could start reading it. You didn't have to go to the synagogue. You could also go to the synagogue to read the Genesis scroll, but you didn't have to. You could go to a Roman library and read Genesis. So there does seem to have been when, for example, Papers of Moses were compiled together and editorially strung together, there does seem to be some attention paid to how this would read as an overall composition. It wasn't an accident. It doesn't seem to be an accident. There does seem to have been intentionality as to how these are strung together. So you are going to more likely see this in reading than you would say in listening. At the same time, too, I think who's doing the reading is going to be the upper classes, as essentially the scribal classes, your priests. Some of them may notice it, some may not. You don't know. But I also think, too, that there does seem to have been some intentionality here. And the reason why I think there's some intentionality in that chiasmus effect is we see it so repeated so many times. We see it repeated so often. It does seem to be something that's intentional. And we don't just see it in say Israelite literature. We see it in other literature too, which is really kind of interesting. Like, for example, we see this in the Punch reliefs of Queen Hatshepsut. She's got chiasmus in her couplets and chiasmus in her Punt narrative. Really phenomenal. So it's not something that's, say, restricted to Israel. Not by any means. So, would they have noticed? Some of the more educated would have. Definitely. I mean, people are writing it. If they're writing it intentionally, they're probably reading it, finding it in as they read it as well. So I can't see any reason why they wouldn't, but I think it's more likely that they would notice it among those who are, say, literate. If they're literate, they probably notice it. If they're not literate or just a listening audience, probably less so. But this also means, too, that if you see this moving around the culture a lot, that it's a thing, and it's a thing that's part of the literary methods of the day. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. It's a very interesting question. John Horton for $10. Thank you very much for that super chat. Took your comment that the lack of super chats might let you finish under 2 hours as a challenge. Oh dear. Yeah, it doesn't look like I'm going to get off with 2 hours. We're already at 2 hours and 40 minutes about. So I don't think I'm going to get off with 2 hours, as much as I would have loved to this time. Yeah, I think you guys are going to keep me on a little longer than that. You just love the sound of my voice. I mean, I got a comment on last week's super chat that last week's live stream that are these live streams started basically on the late side. I mean, we start at usually 8 to 8:30 Pacific Daylight Time, and I apologize for that, but we can't really change it just because of my work schedule. My work schedule doesn't allow me to do this earlier. I'd love to be able to do these at 4 p.m., but can't because of my work schedule. And it's like, he goes, I know, but your voice is so calming that I fall asleep. It's like, okay. Well, at least you're getting a good sleep out of it. There's people who'd pay good money for that. Read me the telephone book so I can go to sleep. It's like, what? There was a pastor once I had who had just one of these fireside lecture. He whenever he preached, he was so calm and so cool. Talks like this very, very fireside chat voice, and oh yeah, and everyone fell asleep because it was just such. You're a grad student, you're sleep deprived, and you're just like
up in the balcony,
up in the balcony, falling asleep. Because it was just hypnotic. It was absolutely hypnotic.
On the balcony, so we actually would.
Of course, we could have, on that balcony, there was nobody up there, so we could have just stretched out and had a good snooze, but it was just like, I'm not sure it achieved the goals of good preaching. I mean, there were excellently structured sermons. There was actually nothing wrong with the sermon. Just the delivery was so calm and relaxing that it was just, you just couldn't help but fall asleep. So, I'm sorry for those who have to stay up late for this, but as I said, I really wish we could do these earlier. Really do. But until something changes with my work situation, that isn't going to happen. But at the same time, too, we are trying to keep this within at least 3 hours. Within 3 hours. Because I like to eat and I like to go to bed also. So, but very, very appreciative of the super chat, and it wasn't meant to be a challenge, okay? Just saying, not meant to be a challenge. More of a vain hope. Oh, no. Exegetical apologetics. More super chats so we get to 5 hours. No, please have mercy on me. You can get a 5-minute intermission. Oh, gee, thanks. He was so kind to me. Okay. We still do have a few super chats left. Let's see here. The camel leopard for $5. Thank you for that super chat. And he says, when and why would the Vav and Kush Genesis 2 have been added if it was originally Kish? Okay. Let's take a look at Genesis 2 here. It's 2 hours and 42. Okay. Okay, now that particular Vav in Kush, it's what's sometimes called a mater's. It's called a mater's. It is actually a consonant that is not original to the text, but is added as a vowel. And we see a number of these in Hebrew. Okay? So, this seems to have happened during the standardization of Hebrew in the 11th to 9th centuries BC. That's typically when scholars place the addition of the maters. Okay? And we find several of these. Okay? This is not restricted to, but this is a particular Vav formation. Okay? So we do find, when we do see these additions of vowels, that vowels, consonants, and there's some consonants that do act like vowels. The Vav is one of them, the Yod is one of them, and the Hey is actually one of them. Okay? So when we see these vowel constructions in the text, we have to be cognizant that these are probably not original to the original text, that these were added after. Later on, what's going to happen is the Masoretes are going to add their own system of vowels, because those maters aren't enough. So they're going to add their own vowels to the Masoretic pointings. But the maters are also not original. we have to keep that in mind too, that they're added so that you can try to differentiate, at least at the time of standardization, which texts, how to read the certain texts. Okay? So in the case of Kush, that Vav is not original. Okay? It's added later. And they added during the time of standardization. So that's sort of that's the brief answer to the question. It's probably added between the 11th and 9th centuries BC during standardization of Hebrew, and it probably would not have been part of the original text. Okay. So, and as I said, and this applies to any meter, not just this particular Vav. So anyway, I hope that answered the question. Thank you very much for the super chat. This is just part of the development of Hebrew as a language. Okay, so because that Vav is not original, it could either read at that point Kish or Kush, and I think given the context, Kish is a better reading. So, okay, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Oh boy. Ancient Egypt and the Bible cable TV coming soon. Oh no. Oh no. Well, we had a couple of these stretched like 3 hours and 40 minutes, and it's like, well, do we start breaking these up into doing these multiple times a week? Just the idea of doing these for shorter periods of time, and then it's like, wait, if I do that, we're going to end up doing 3 hours 2 times a week, then 3 times a week, and then 4. Then I've got my own radio show. I mean, it's like, is that what I really want to do? Is my own radio show? We did this to reduce the number of questions I had to take, not have them just propagate like bunnies. Spay and neuter your bunnies. Don't give them radio shows.
There's something you don't hear on
Kids, don't let your bunnies live stream. It's a mistake, I tell you. It's a mistake. Yeah, don't let your bunnies grow up to be YouTubers. Camel Lipper says, it'd be better than those televangelists. Well, that's kind of a low bar. I mean, really? Come on. My wife says, sorry, she's not getting a beehive hairdo. Okay. We are going to try to wrap this up around 11. So I think we're getting close to the end. I think we got 2 more super chats. All right. Johnny C says, for $19.99, thank you very much for that super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. Good evening. Thoughts on Peter Feynman's idea that the Exodus consisted of Hyksos Levites leaving Egypt during the reign of Ramses II, year 7. I'm reading his chapter now on the 5 views on the Exodus. I don't buy Feynman's view. Okay, for a couple reasons, I don't buy his view. He does. I think, first of all, that the Hyksos had left. I mean, he doesn't understand what Hyksos were. This is actually what's called the Levite hypothesis. And the Levite hypothesis is that there was a actual small exodus of Levites leaving Egypt. They're related to the Hyksos, and they basically wander Sinai a bit. They infiltrate into Israel and then basically spread their ideas amongst the local population to basically make all of the Canaanites Israelites, and those Levites write the Levitical law, and then you get the documentary hypothesis, creating a formation of the scriptures from the memory of this Levite Exodus. Okay. I got some issues with this. Now, I agree with him that there wasn't a real Exodus during the reign of Ramses II. I disagree on the year. I think year 7 is a very, very poor candidate for this. I think you really do need to extend this because Ramses II is still doing campaigns in year 17. So you have to pretty much do the Exodus after Ramses II stops his campaigning. So that precludes any Exodus before year 17. Because while Ramses II is doing campaigning, he's still got a huge chariot army. The second thing is, I don't think Feynman understands what really the Hyksos were. The Hyksos aren't the people group. They're the leadership. Hyksos is an Egyptian word that means foreign rulers. Okay? They're the leadership. They're not the people group. So I'm not really buying that these are Hyksos. I think that, the Hyksos were basically defeated by Akhmos I at the beginning of Dynasty 18. They're no more. There's really no more Hyksos at that point. Finally, I don't agree with the whole Levite infiltration idea. It does appear that during the 12th and 11th, or the late 13th, early 12th century BC, we find this just explosion of Israelite settlements that happened in Canaan. You couldn't do that with just the Levites. You need more than that. You need a whole nation. It also doesn't, it's not congruent with the destructions of, say, Jericho or Hatzor either. So I've got some serious doubts about that whole Levite infiltration hypothesis. And then finally, this whole artifice is predicated upon the documentary hypothesis. Without the documentary hypothesis, this whole thing wouldn't even be necessary. Because all of this is used to explain both the necessity, basically the necessity of the documentary hypothesis, while at the same time allowing for a real exodus also through memorial theory. Without the documentary hypothesis, this whole thing is really not necessary at all. It's all moot. It can be explained better in other ways. So because I doubt a documentary hypothesis right out of the gate, I don't see any necessity for this theory at all. So I think this has got a lot of problems. I'm not a big fan of this theory. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for this. I hope that explains my view of his position, and I think that it has got a lot of shortcomings. As I say, there's one part of this I do agree with, which it happens during the reign of Ramses II, but apart from that, his view of the Exodus is so minimal. It's really just sort of a wax nose that he sort of molds to make it fit with the documentary hypothesis. He wants his cake and eat it too. And that's very, very difficult to accomplish as fraught with error. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. I think we have one more super chat. That's okay. Cole Walker for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Hi, Dr. Falk. No question. Just wanted to say that I'm really excited to start your Gnosticism series, and thank you for your. Well, you're most welcome. And thank you for your super chat. I very, very much enjoyed doing the last Gnosticism video. I did my master's degree as a studying the historical roots of Gnosticism, and I've never actually had the opportunity much to use what I learned from that on the channel. So it was very interesting to be able to sort of dust off some of that and be able to present it. In fact, a lot of it came out of a paper I did for the Bible and Archaeology conference that I was invited to in Liverpool. So that was a lot of fun to be able to dust that off, to do some new graphics for it. Got to did some experimental techniques I've never had a chance to do, and some new editing techniques also. So it was a lot of fun to do that. I really enjoyed doing it. I had to do an all-nighter though, I have to admit. Uh, uh, that video was completed about 2 hours before it went up, before it went live. I got no sleep that night. Fortunately, I had the day off the next day, so I could do that. But yeah, I had to pull an all-nighter to get that one edited and done, just because the graphics on that were so complicated. But I really enjoyed doing that. It was a real blast, and I think the content is going to help a lot of people, because a lot of people do have questions about Gnosticism, and it hasn't gone away. Gnosticism has not gone away. There are still Gnostic groups running around the landscape, and they still confuse people. So I'm very, very happy that that you're excited about this series, and I hope you learn something from it, and I hope it blesses you and the community. And I want to thank you very much for that super chat. Really appreciate it, and we depend upon support from people like you. It's amazing that we have gotten so much support for this particular content. As I said earlier, when we started off this channel, we knew we were starting a real niche channel. You know, ancient Egypt in the Bible doesn't get much more niche than that. But we also figured that, you know, if we provide good content, somebody will watch it. We didn't realize how popular it would become. Yeah, we're not a huge channel even now, but it was more popular than we expected it to be. And we are so grateful that people have really benefited from it. That's what we wanted. When my wife and I went to seminary, we went to seminary together. And we went to seminary with the goal in mind of teaching the next generation, you know, the Bible, archaeology, how to do proper exegesis, how to do proper interpretation, how history plays into how we read the Bible. So we knew that we were up for a challenge. We knew that this was going to be a challenge. So we just sort of put the content out there and let people just respond to it naturally. And we're so grateful that so many people have benefited from the content. And we're so pleased. Yeah, we get our haters too. We get a lot of haters from both sides. We get haters from the atheists. We get haters from, say, the more religiously conservative. But a lot of people have benefited. We are so grateful about that. People are learning. People are discovering new things about the Bible. People are getting excited about the Bible again. I have to admit, you know, one person asked me at a conference once, you know, you've got all this education of the Bible. Don't you find it dry? Don't you find it boring? No, absolutely not. Every time I open the Bible, I find something new and something interesting. You know, this hasn't, this experience I had at seminary, and I know my seminary experience isn't typical, but it gave me the tools. Getting a world-class education, biblical education, gave me the tools so I can open up the scriptures and I see something new, exciting, and interesting every time. If I wanted to, I could just keep writing papers on the Bible. I'd never run out of material. Because every time I open it up, I see something new. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. I call myself a perpetual student. I don't call myself an expert. I call myself a perpetual student because I want to keep learning. So every time I open up the Bible, I learn something new. My frontiers are expanding every time I turn the pages of the scriptures. This is intoxicating. It's absolutely intoxicating to be able to open up God's word and see something new every time that you didn't see the last time you looked at it. And people are starting to discover this. People are starting to discover how truly interesting the Bible is. They're also finding out how interesting Egypt is. So it's a win-win. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for the super chat. I want to thank you for the support. I'm so glad you are finding the Gnosticism series interesting, and want to thank you very much for your support. Okay. I think that's the last of the super chats. I will take 2 non-super chat questions, and then we're going to call it a night because it is 11 o'clock already. Find some of those cues here. Revelation says telethon. We'd be doing reruns before telethon. Sorry. Ooh. Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Actually, I'm going to take this one on eschatology because I think this is actually kind of interesting. Recreation. If Revelation 19 is the second coming of Christ, then the white throne judgment happens after 1,000 years. Does that mean Jesus comes back a third time? White throne judgment. Not necessarily. Okay? It is true that Revelation 19 is the second coming of Jesus. Okay? He's basically coming to rest the Antichrist, throw the false prophet in the Antichrist in the lake of fire, and basically set up his 1,000-year reign. Now, that 1,000 years is kind of it's an idiom. It's an idiom in Greek. We don't know exactly how long that reign is, but he uses that idiom over and over and over again. We kind of see, like, for example, in ancient Israelite culture, they use the idiom 40 to express a very, very long time. Okay? Like, for example, in 1 Kings 6:1, it uses 480 instead for a really long time. In Greek, they use the word 1,000. And we even see this idiom used in, say, by Peter, where it says, a day to the Lord is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. It's an idiom to express God's timelessness, but the 1,000 years here is meant to express an exceptionally long time. It's like a kid waiting for his parents and says, "You've been gone 1,000,000 years." Well, not really. Or, "You've been gone forever." Well, not really forever because you came back, but it's a euphemism to express a very, very long time. Now, that white throne judgment um, happens when the heavens and earth are basically in that particular event. It's not so much that Jesus is coming down the third time, but more that humans are being brought up to him for judgment. One way or the other, either through death or through summary judgment. Okay? So it's not so much that the Great White Throne judgment is not about Christ coming back. It's that the sinner is coming up to God to receive their reward or lack thereof. Okay? So this is not a third return, it's more the opposite, where God is sitting on his throne in the heavens to exercise his final judgment. That's very, very different than coming down. Okay? So we do see that Revelation 19 is the second coming of Jesus Christ, but there's no third coming. This is sort of the opposite direction. God is seated on his throne to exercise judgment, and people having to come to him. And there's a very, very strong imagery here. This is a very strong imagery here. The imagery here is of a conquering king. Okay? The king has conquered. The war is over. Now there's the and this happened actually a number of times in history. Like for example, when Augustus Caesar finally conquered his last enemy, he set up his throne on, I forget where it was. I think it was on Cyprus, and everyone in the Roman Empire had to come to him for a reckoning. And of course, Herod goes and has this incredulous, speech where he says, Mark Antony was my friend. I was loyal to him. Now, Mark Antony is dead. Caesar is alive. Now I'm Caesar's friend. And Augustus actually bought it. But there was that reckoning. The king is on his throne. And everyone has to come and give the reckoning of what they did. Kings did this in the ancient world. Everyone knew it. And it was still done in the Roman Empire in sort of recent events. So that's the image here of the Great White Throne Judgment, is God and Christ are on their throne in the heavens, and everyone has to come now to them and give the reckoning. So that's sort of what's going on here. So it's not a third return, it's a final reckoning. So anyway, it's a great question, which is why I took it. Thank you very much for the question. It's, as I said, wonderful, wonderful question. Okay, we'll take one more question, and then we will call it a night. We are going past 3 hours now. Oh, interesting question. Let's take that one, though. Let's see if there's any better question. Okay, I think I know which one I'll take. I'll take this one. This is a personal question. You okay with this? Music, the Revelation music? Okay. Revelation asks, and this will be the final question of the night. Ha ha ha, yeah. Was any music involved in the courting of Mrs. Falk? No. um, Mrs. Falk is not an audiophile. I am. Okay. Okay, and I wouldn't have been an audiophile myself if I hadn't worked in a music shop and grown up, let's say, amongst family that was very, very talented musically. Okay. Um, so, um, so I'm much more of an audiophile. She's not. She's really not. Uh, she's into reading novels. Okay? She's a big reader. She reads science fiction. So we did have that in common, that we both loved science fiction. Okay, in fact, we met at a science fiction convention. That's where we met. But music was not part of the courtship. Okay, so oh, we just got another super chat, or a super sticker anyway. So anyway, this will be the last non-super chat of the night. I'm going to acknowledge that sticker that just came in. And I think we will call it a night after that. We just got a $5 Australian from Aleco, a super sticker. Thank you very much for that super sticker. If there is a question, and you post it quickly, we'll answer it. But I want to thank you very much for that super sticker. You know, that helps too, and we really appreciate it. Because it really goes to supporting our ministry. You know, it basically keeps us, you know, fed and pays the electricity, for the computers, all that stuff. You know, if without you guys, we really couldn't afford to keep doing this. So we're so really grateful for your financial support. So thank you very, very much for that super sticker. So grateful. And just, we really, really appreciate it. Okay. With that, I think we are going to call it a night here. We've been going on for 3.25 hours. So we've been going a long time. No, we're not doing the 5-hour marathon. Not happening. Okay. So anyway, we're going to wrap it up here. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. I want to thank everyone who supported us with super chats and with great questions. We do love the questions. There's nothing I love more than a good question. So keep the questions coming. They're fantastic, they're interesting, and this is the service we try to provide the community. We also want to thank our subscribers. We've hit 7,000 subscribers just yesterday, and we are so appreciative to those who have supported us by watching our material, commenting, leaving likes and dislikes, because the YouTube algorithm likes both dislikes and likes. So anytime you interact with our videos, it helps the algorithm say, hey, this is something interesting. I also want to thank our Patreon supporters who donate to our channel without as much recognition and purse as they deserve. They do it sacrificially, and we are so, so grateful for all our Patreon supporters, because they're the guys who really keep our equipment up, when it breaks. They're the ones who pay for the replacements. So we really, really are grateful to all our Patreon supporters. And with that said, I want to wish you all a great night. Thank you for joining us tonight, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night, everyone.